everyone. We kind of decided that it's better for me to sit down and show the slides, but if that's not convenient for you, this is the time to tell me, and I sit. And everyone can see me, yeah? Okay. Well, what I wanted to start this second part of our panel by saying that I am a journalist, and that we have heard a lot of things about media and how journalists might behave unethically. I am here to answer all your doubts and all the questions in regards to my profession, and to slightly defend us a little bit. But since I will be talking about internet, media, social media, web 2.0, privacy, and all these keywords, as you can see, I have to say that since one of the main principles of our contemporary communication is two-way communication, so that's what social media brought to us. So I would encourage you to ask any questions. I will try on my side to save some time for us to debate things that I'm going to just bring up as problems. So no so much talking one way, but I would really encourage you to ask questions and that we can debate all the challenges that we are faced with. First of all, I wanted to just make a statement, as we all probably know, that freedom of expression is challenged in everyday communication, in everyday life. It's challenging on our mainstream media. It is challenged, of course, on social media. So I will make a distinction between, when I say mainstream media, I mean big broadcasters, public services, newspapers, so media as we know it before social media came up. But in 21st century, we have to admit that social media is a source of information and is a phenomenon that we have to count on. There is a reason why internet and web 2.0 developed such tools as social media. There's a very good reason for that. The main reason is because mainstream media before social media came up was so closed, was so establishment-orientated that audience, or as my dear professor from New York University, Joy Rosen, would say, people as formerly known as audience, so us, we needed a tool to express ourselves. We started not believing in mainstream media. That's why we debate on social media. That's why we post on Facebook and we tweet and we share photographs on Instagram. It wasn't our caprice or anything else. There was a reason. Of course, with the development of social media and with the mass production and mass use, a lot of troubles and a lot of challenges came up, but that's why we are here to debate that and to see how we can improve our discussion and our use, especially professional use on social media. There is of course, difference between private and professional. It's only the question when we use private as a professional and when we misuse private, especially private data, by, I have to say, some of the state agency, like we have seen in United States and in United Kingdom, as Edward Snowden and WikiLeaks have shown that the audience, journalists, and all our privacy rights have been misused by the government. So this, at least we know for these two countries. I will focus on two things. I think that someone already said, our colleague, that social media can have a positive impact and negative or dangerous impact. Positive impact, I think that I've already mentioned, social media can be very useful for organizing, especially communities. in a way of communicating, people who don't have communication tools, especially in very repressive countries or closed regimes. Social media can be good. But of course, we're here to discuss how freedom of speech and how freedom of expression is threatened by digital media, digital communications, especially on social networks. And I have chosen one case study to illustrate what I'm trying to say. That's Charlie Hebdo attack from January 2015. And of course, when we see these images and picture, already we have some notion of what was happening and how great, in a way, our stand-up for freedom of expression was. You remember millions of people marching through streets of Paris. Freedom of expression was violated in a very terrible, terroristic way. And freedom of expression advocates, like we are, stood up to defend it. But, there is but, always. I presume that you are aware of this photo. It is actually, it is a video that was broadcasted on major and big mainstream media, respectable broadcasters, you would say. It was published in newspapers. We, as a public, was introduced to this photo, video. My thesis and my argument, and I'm here to strongly defend what I'm going to say. This video should have never been shown. This is against all ethical journalistic principles. This is against freedom of speech. This is against freedom of expression. Why? Because by broadcasting and showing this video of a simple, direct execution of first human being, second police officer in Paris, journalists, my colleagues, weren't thinking about this man's family. They weren't thinking about his colleagues. They weren't thinking about the public and the reaction that this video would cause. They weren't thinking about context, possible revenge, possible hatred or hate speech that showing this video might cause. So what I'm trying to define here is this very fine difference between following something that was circulated on social media. This video showed up a couple of minutes after the attack. First place that it had appeared was, I think, Facebook or YouTube. So mainstream media just thinking, wow, this is going to be everywhere. I just have to follow the ethics of free markets and not journalistic ethics. They broadcast the video. And to my opinion, that is very dangerous. That sometimes by defending freedom of speech, freedom of expression, we actually forget to what extent of danger we might end up. We are not being responsible. And that's my point exactly, that when we talk about media, social media, in the context of freedom of expression, we have to understand and we have to admit that journalists, but more even editors, need to stand up for responsibility, credibility, and non-bias. And this is what define or differ media as a public service rather than media as a propagandist tool. If you are responsible, if you put things in context, if you build up your credibility by decisions to publish or not to publish something, and if you're trying to be non-biased, then we can talk about media as such. But I think that previous guest mentioned yellow pages, journalist media. I would say that's not media. That's just a loose product of commercialization and neoliberalism. Because, you know, we are here to sell, we are here to entertain. No, media has a role to educate and to inform. Entertainment comes afterwards. Of course, when we talk about the phenomenon of social media, we can't just focus on news, global affairs, on social media as a platform where main news are shared or discussed or everything. We have to admit and we have to allow that, as I mentioned before, social media can also be used in a private way, as private people publish all sorts of things. That is their right. But again, if you are a public person, as this football director of the football club, Rangers, was, you have to be responsible for what you say, because whatever you say or write on social media, it is exactly the same as you went on live TV and said exactly the same thing. But there is no difference. The thing that you post something on your private Facebook page is the same as you went live on TV and said these things. And of course, because I'm coming from the United Kingdom, especially that country, recently there's been many cases brought up as online abuse. I have read just before coming to the conference that Twitter is about to introduce new measures to protect users from hate speech and online abuse. And that's something that every company should be doing to build up the credibility. But I think that we are here to discuss freedom of expression and hate speech in a more broader term. And I think that we, in a way, can ask where freedom of speech ends and where hate speech starts. That's also the area that we could debate later. Of course, speaking about Charlie Hebdo, we need to learn some lessons. We have to say that we have learned something. I would like to think about that. It was noted that Charlie Hebdo is the first, how shall I say, a first global event that social media won the battle against media. So these are some of the figures that I picked up. So 3.4 million mentions of Je suis Charlie on Twitter, which means the great solidarity, the great, if you want, stand up for freedom of expression was shown. And that's amazing. That's great. That gives us, that gives power to the people. But of course, in the evening, at least in the UK, we switched on to BBC. So BBC had more than average viewers on the same day when the attack happened. It was Wednesday, I think. Of course, another example of great solidarity, which was started on social media, was funding the newspaper, Charlie Hebdo, so that they can get out again. So all this money was collected, and that's another example of a great victory of everyone who stands for freedom of expression. A couple of months later, actually it was in March, I think, last week, Committee for Protection of Journalists noted that French government, in a way, misused the law by giving a special, if you want, special power to Interior Ministry, French Interior Ministry, to block certain websites. I believe this is special power because if you are Interior Ministry, you block the websites without any court review, without any prosecution process. You block website just because you don't like the content of the website. And I'm not saying that content spreading, for example, hate speech. I don't want to discuss the content. But I think that it's very dangerous if we misuse the law that is given to us as a protection for freedom of expression, that we misuse it and we go onto this side, repressive side, and onto the field of repressive forces that we are actually trying to stand against. I hope that you understand what I mean. I especially have in mind when I talk about misuse of terror law, I especially have in mind United Kingdom, Turkey, Vietnam, Cuba, etc. So as I already mentioned here, that responsibility is one of the main things and one of my main messages that I wanted to share with you today, as well as credibility and trustworthy sources of information. Of course, as I started, I wanted to make that comparison between the age before the internet as we know it, when we had our media, we had our principles, we had our freedom of expression, universal declaration of human rights. We had in a certain way world order that we kind of followed, but then information age changed everything and our habits changed with it. I really like this quote. As you said, as you see, Scott Heron sung about it in 1970s, complaining that mainstream television wouldn't dare to inform us about what is happening in marginalized groups or communities. Since I work for Media Diversity Institute, we are very, very much in name of promoting minority rights and marginalized groups in the media. Everywhere in the world, there is no exception, everywhere in the world, somehow certain minorities are not visible. And in these minorities I include women, disabled people, people with different sexual orientation, ethnical and religious minorities. Mainstream media in Europe are mostly white, male, well-educated, and above 45. Media Diversity Institute wants to change that. The reason of mentioning this is to, in a way, give one positive aspect to new tools of communications and social media. Because if you are unheard for decades, as we can see, in 1970, not everyone was heard. Then you developed certain mechanisms in order to be heard, or in order to communicate with others. And for such a thing, we can thank Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, all other social media tools. I came up to my second example, which is a positive example of reorganizing the public, reorganizing the communities, which is a positive example of people just saying something that they think it's important to be said. That's a campaign, Black Lives Matter, and I presume that all of you already know that it started in Ferguson in the United States last summer. Because of the great repression against African Americans. And that repression not only came from the police forces or from institutions, but also from mainstream US media. And that's why mainly black people turned to one of the social media platforms, such as Twitter, and created this Black Lives Matter campaign. I did choose this quote because it's quite old, and it is by a famous writer and essayist who he wrote this to his nephew in 1963. I think everyone can see that these words can actually apply even in 2015, unfortunately. So some things don't change. And I think that we should ask questions how to change things for better, without imposing and involving more repression and more, if you want, counter law, fighting freedom, protecting freedom of expression, but somehow suppressing it. I think this is a very good theme for debate later on, so I'll leave it there. This is a figure that I have chosen. This is figure by official FBI data. So that's why young black people, young African Americans got together and they used social media for their for their goals, for their aims, to be heard. Conclusions, I would, apart from saying that we have to be careful not to misuse, how shall I say, not to misuse our great notion that freedom of expression is under threat by jumping and threatening others, to be aware of minorities and to be aware of marginalized groups, to be aware of people who are weaker than we are. Social media, of course, is to be used only if they are reliable as source of information, and I think that any of my colleagues, professional journalists, know that, and that they conduct according to this rule. But what my colleagues forget in many cases is to provide a context. I'm going to go back just slightly to Charlie Hebdo again. When this attack happened, media reports and coverage were full of condemnation of such a terrorist and awful act. But not so many of them provided context. Why Charlie Hebdo happened? That's the question the public wants to know. And if we are serious, and if we really want to move forward this society, we need to provide context and ask ourselves difficult questions. As I already said, this way of the communication is changing, so media, mainstream media, has to leave that linear one way and to include audience in their coverage, in the topics they cover, in the speakers they choose, to include minorities, to include marginalized groups, people who don't have platforms or are great advocates to speak on their behalf. And that is it. I came to an end. Thank you.